Support for Colorado Today comes from Credit Union of Colorado. With access to over 30,000 ATMs and a mobile app, they're dedicated to offering the services of a big bank with a heart. Learn more at honestlygood.org.
Support for Colorado Today comes from Safeway, helping you prepare for Thanksgiving with fresh produce, quality meats, and all the ingredients for your favorite holiday dishes. Learn more at Safeway.com or in the Safeway app.
Colorado Hoops legend Chauncey Billups was in court yesterday. The current Trailblazers coach and Basketball Hall of Famer pleaded not guilty to federal charges that allege he profited from rigged poker games. Yes, allegedly the mob still exists and they still play cards. Billups' attorney denies the allegations against him, and for now, he'll remain free on bond. I'm Haley May. Coming up, a Colorado Republican is trying to get an extension for expanded health insurance subsidies.
I don't care how red or blue your district is. This is something that your constituents care about.
The president may be coming around to it. Then, why Xcel Energy says it needs to raise your rates.
This is basically how companies like Xcel make money.
Plus, a new book tells the story of one soldier's bravery in refusing to take part in the Sand Creek Massacre, which will be remembered this weekend.
He actually disobeys orders.
It's Tuesday, November 25th. Here's the news in Colorado today. A Colorado Republican freshman in Congress is trying to lead his colleagues on an issue that was at the heart of the recent government shutdown.
The cost of health care and health care premiums is not a Republican issue. It's not a Democratic issue. I don't care how red or blue your district is. This is something that your constituents care about. And as
Jeff Hurd spoke at a news conference Friday, where he and 3 other federal lawmakers unveiled a bill to extend enhanced subsidies for the Affordable Care Act marketplace. Let's hear more from CPR's congressional correspondent Caitlin Kim. Caitlin, starting with this bill, what are representatives like Hurd proposing?
So, Haley, you'll remember that during the pandemic, the federal government expanded its subsidies to help people who buy health insurance on the marketplace. Now, the bill that Hurd is proposing with another Republican and 2 Democrats would extend those for 2 more years with some modifications.
And what might those look like?
So it would limit who's eligible. Starting at 600% of the federal poverty level, the tax credit would begin to phase out and be gone by 935% of the federal poverty level. So people have the math. For a family of 4, it would start phasing out at around $200,000 in income a year and be gone by $300,000. And there would also be guardrails to prevent against fraud. Hurd and the others stressed this bill that they're proposing would be temporary. It prevents these steep increases that people who buy health insurance on the exchange are seeing for next year, sometimes more than double what they paid this year. And in theory, it gives Congress time to address a serious policy issue, the high cost of health care. Here's how Hurd described it.
this gives us time in Congress to build a bridge to a system where we can fix those underlying cost drivers. And I know...
Why is Hurd getting involved in this now? And will he face any risk by advocating for an issue that, at least in the past, the president and a lot of other Republicans have voiced some opposition to?
So Hurd's district, the 3rd congressional district on Colorado's western slope and southern Colorado, including Pueblo, is seeing some of the highest premium increases. So this is something he's hearing about from his constituents. He's been writing letters to his leadership concerned about the skyrocketing costs and was part of a bipartisan bill that was looking at a 1-year extension. Now, there is some political risk for Hurd. This is an issue, as you mentioned, that the majority of Republicans in Congress do not support. I talked to Republican Representative Gabe Evans, who represents parts of northern Colorado, and he's also hearing from people in his district worried about the affordability of health care.
I've talked to folks that have said, why should I, as somebody that's making, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year, have to subsidize somebody who's making $200,000 a year, $300,000 a year?
Now, Evans didn't say whether he does or does not support an extension, but he said that it's a conversation that needs to happen, especially around income caps and limiting fraud and abuse.
So, Caitlin, are we seeing Republicans and President Trump getting to be more open to the idea of an extension?
So there's no Republican unity on an approach, and I think that's part of the problem. At the same time Hurd and his bipartisan group introduced their bill, another centrist Republican is drafting his own bill to address the issue. Now, Trump sees the same polls that we do that suggest voters want him to make more progress on affordability issues, and this is one of those issues. And this weekend, the Trump administration floated what I think you can call a trial balloon. There were reports that he was going to advocate for a temporary 2-year extension of the credit. Then he got resistance from Republicans, and so now it might not happen. It's all pretty fluid still.
Now, as part of the agreement to end the government shutdown, Republican Senate leaders promised a vote on subsidy extensions within the next few weeks. But leadership in the House, where Jeff Hurd is, has been less committed. How much of that influences these lawmakers, including Hurd, of the so-called Problem Solvers Caucus?
In theory, Republicans and the problem solvers have a lot of influence because of the narrow Republican majority. All it takes is usually 2 or 3 GOP members that can make all the difference. But look, Hurd has ruled out going around leadership to get this idea onto the floor. So while he's stepping out on a limb trying to build support both within Congress, especially his Republican conference, and the public for this idea, there's also a limit to how far out on that limb he's willing to go and how much he's willing to challenge leadership. In terms of how this ultimately ends for people who rely on these tax credits, I think a lot will depend on what, if anything, can get passed in the Senate. Leadership there promised a vote. They did not promise an outcome. But if something does pass the Senate, I think there'll be a lot of pressure on the House to act.
Okay, CPR's Caitlin Kim. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Haley.
Did you just plug in your holiday lights? Well, you may want to enjoy the somewhat affordable glow while you can. Xcel Energy just asked the state to raise your energy bills by around 10% next year. CPR climate reporter Ishan Thakur is with us. Ishan, what's prompting this rate hike from Xcel?
It's been a really expensive few years for Xcel. The company has spent a lot of money on its wildfire liability insurance. It's had to beef up its distribution system and upgrade a lot of old equipment. So according to Xcel, those costs, plus some interest, add up to about $350 million. And now the company is asking state regulators if it can recoup those costs in the form of rate hikes.
And is it normal for utility companies to pass their own investment costs along to customers? Has Xcel ever done this before?
Yeah, this is basically how companies like Xcel make money. So the last time Xcel did this was back in 2022 when it wanted to increase its base rates. The company's original request during that time, though, generated a ton of pushback because of how much it would end up costing consumers. So the state ended up scaling back that proposed rate increase, and that ended up being well below the 10% increase that Xcel is proposing for next year.
And this time around, is the upcoming rate increase finalized?
No, so it's almost certain that this will spark some intense debate between environmentalists, consumer advocates, municipalities, and regulators. This is exactly what happened last time, and a lot of the upcoming debate could be focused on how much money Xcel is making from a rate hike.
Right, and whether this is about more than just recouping investment costs.
Yeah, because the $350 million figure I mentioned earlier, that includes a nearly 10% surcharge that's reserved for Xcel and its shareholders. So that surcharge is how an investor-owned utility like Xcel attracts investment to build really expensive things like power plants. But this return on equity, as it's called, it's received a lot of criticism for potentially jacking up customer bills across the country.
So Xcel says the surcharge is to keep investing in the grid, but consumer advocates worry that it's just to make extra money for shareholders.
Exactly. But ultimately, state regulators will decide what that surcharge number is and how much of the upgrades and liability insurance and distribution network costs, how much of that shareholders should pay for versus ratepayers. One thing ratepayers will not shoulder the cost of, though, the settlements that Xcel agreed to pay over its alleged role in the Marshall Fire.
So it'll be the state regulators at the Public Utilities Commission that ultimately approve the rate hike. What have they had to say about that proposal?
They haven't weighed in yet on the proposal, but they've been really sounding alarm bells about the fact that customers might see much higher bills in the next few years. That's because Xcel has a lot of plans up in the air to build new green energy plants or to build new power lines or to even tamp down on wildfire risk. Those things are all really expensive. Some estimates say that residential rates from just one of those plans may increase by 55% in 2029 compared to 2024. And that's just one low-case estimate.
Okay, CPR's Ishan Thakur, thank you.
You're welcome.
It's been 161 years since the Sand Creek Massacre, the deadliest day in Colorado's history. Union soldiers attacked a camp on the plains in southeastern Colorado where Cheyenne and Arapaho people had been seeking peace with white settlers. Soldiers killed hundreds of them, mostly women, children, and elders. Nancy Nero is the author of a new book called Witness at Sand Creek. It explores the letters left behind by a soldier who refused to participate in the massacre.
He actually disobeys orders. He does not allow his men to engage in it that are under his command. He then watches 250 Cheyenne and Arapaho elders, women, and children horrifically murdered and mutilated on November 29th, 1864.
Nero is a journalist, preservationist, and hospice chaplain minister. She stumbled on the story of Captain Silas Soule while working at the Colorado Historical Society.
And then I ended up working at Denver's historic cemeteries at the Fairmont Heritage Foundation with Fairmont Cemetery and Riverside Cemetery. And I discovered his grave.
Soule came from an abolitionist family. They had moved from the East Coast to Kansas to help keep slavery out of the state. And then
he comes to Colorado with his cousins and his brother to find gold in 1860 and is here in Gilpin County that he loves. And the American Civil War has broken out and he enlists in December 1861 in Black Hawk.
Nero's book centers around 25 letters that Soule wrote between 1860 and 1865, which were carefully preserved by Soule's family throughout the generations.
I also appreciate so much in these letters just this funny guy who makes fun of himself frequently, but also this reflection of military life as well.
One of those letters details the atrocities he witnessed at Sand Creek.
He writes a letter to Ned Wincoop, a friend and colleague, a letter with extraordinary detail of what he saw of these murders and these mutilations. That letter moves its way through the military hierarchy.
Congress did an official inquiry into the massacre, and Soule testified against his commanding officer.
Silas is the first witness, and he's a witness for 6 days in the inquiry. And then he's assassinated on the streets of Denver in April 1865.
Despite his killers being known, they were never brought to justice. Nero says Soule's civil disobedience is a lesson in moral courage, but she's hesitant to call him a hero.
I don't want to lift him up into whatever people perceive a hero is supposed to be or has to be, or even, I don't even like the word hero in the language of, as we try to look at historic racial injustice. I just struggle with finding that word appropriate. There are a lot of other words. I think he is courageous and he is devoted to his family and he is committed to doing the work of justice seeking and ultimately trying to be peacemaking prior to Sand Creek.
She added that his actions still resonate for her even today.
How can we use his story of just knowing right from wrong, and in the moment that mattered the most for him, he knew without hesitation. And I think that's what when we know right from wrong is like, we don't hesitate. We don't spend time wondering if this is the right thing to do. We do it from our heart, from our gut, from our spirit. And I think Silas is demonstrating these ways in these letters and in his life around how to show up and stand up and speak up with people of color.
Nancy Nero's new book is called Witness at Sand Creek, and this Saturday, the Denver Public Library and the Sand Creek Massacre Memorial Committee are holding a candlelight vigil to commemorate the lives that were lost 161 years ago this week. The event is free and open to the public, but registration is recommended. You can see more information linked in today's show notes. Reporting for today's show came from CPR's Haley Sanchez. It's Thanksgiving week, but we are still cooking up local news to keep you informed at the dinner table. Stay up to date by following Colorado Today in your podcast app. I'm Haley May. This is CPR News.
Support for Colorado Today comes from Safeway, where you can get a free honeysuckle white turkey when you spend $100 or more in a single transaction through November 27th. Clip the offer in the Safeway app and make your holiday feast delicious.
Support for Colorado Today comes from Credit Union of Colorado. With access to over 30,000 ATMs and a mobile app, they're dedicated to offering the services of a big bank with a heart. Learn more at honestlygood.org.